Bom dia a todos. Bem-vindos a esta sessão de quarta-feira. Welcome for everybody around the world. Thank you for coming to this new session on Wednesday. And let me introduce very briefly, our moderator is Outi Lauakangas, just on the screen. And the first presenter is Lisa Granbon Erranen. And after we will have in the morning others, but the moderator will present very shortly. A second note, and as I said yesterday, please, if people want to have some questions and to be replied, please use email or other vias, because we have no time. 30 minutes for the presentation is I think that is short, but of course we must adapt to this period because other persons are in time trying to put their presentation. So please, if you have questions, address those questions to the presenters by email. Thank you very much. Outi, I give you the floor.
So I ask Lisa to share the screen now, and we can begin. And maybe you can ask also in this chat, but I can't follow it. No, please, Lisa.
Do I have a microphone on? Yes. Yeah, okay. Good morning for everybody. It's actually near the lunchtime in Finland, but morning anyhow. Today I will speak about nature and why it has been relevant, especially in Finnish proverbs, somehow also in Estonian proverbs and other small Finnish-Ugrian language area countries. The main European philosophical ideas in Finland proved to be useful in Finnish context to the nationality and national identity. We always have to ask why something happens. Beginning in the 1840s, the phenomenon movement, which I have been talking sometimes before also, and maybe you remember Topelius, formed mainly by representatives of the civilization who had upper classes, who had learned at university, and they were building an image of Finland as a unified national entity formed on the basis of a long, true history. Kalevala was the result of that. It is not true. It was not history. The linguistic, aesthetic, and scientific historical meanings became intertwined in many ties into the contradictory YB and during autonomy. You know, Finland was an autonomic Grand Duchy of Russian. It began to play a significant part in the construction of nationality and Finnishness. When interpreting these materials, a clear division between the elite and the Kurd folk is also fumbled. There have been a tendency from the old, from example, to think that an oral galley-wise poem in style is automatically a folk poem, that is, refers to the lowest stratum of legislated society. However, the scholars of the beginning of the New Age, or can we call it New Age, but 1900, used folk's proverbs as their own. The Raffle used Christian text and as their own. So many of them were not from Finnish nature, but even they were in Finnish. But on the other hand, Christian proverbs from Bible, they became a part of Finnish tradition because ceremonies were given in Finnish. the relation, as I say here that these pictures are from that the Finnish Heritage Agency, and they are allowed to be used in this kind of connection. Nature and Proverbs is defined by society with needs and thoughts, and why? It was Romanticism in Finland. It idealized language and folk culture, highlighted the connection in Finland between nature and folk cultural traditions. And everything of this, all this was included in Proverbs. And Lönnroth's, maybe you have not heard, he was the creator of the Kalevala, Elias Lönnroth. His folklore and proverb collections were also one response to the national reform of the Romanticism period, which, as I have said, was a part of the, was called National Romanticism in Finland. And it is worth of remembering that proverb publications are always accompanied by the collector's or publisher's decision on the included material. And in the end, there is a possibility, very strong possibility, of purpose seeking for publication. It was not only in Finland in 1900, it is still today everywhere we publish them, proverbs. The earliest mention of the selection of material in Finland is in the commencement speech of Elias Lönnroth's collection, published 1842, in which Lönnroth stated that he had included everything except, which were mind-boggling parables of themselves, that is, otherwise boisterous lewd with no folded idea to be given. So it means that he didn't see the problem, but there are a lot of proverbs he has as unsuitable language left alone. And for those, I gave no room for in publication. And remember, this is also today, everywhere. Folk poetry. All poetry embraced by the people and living among the people was that time in Finland considered to be part of folk poetry. Kalevala meter has been held as a proof of originality. I have also told that to you, so I'm sorry, I have misinformed you, because I was also learned to taught to believe that. But in fact, the main reason for this was that many Finnish poems and a lot of proverbs were transformed to Kalevala meter. Okay, we can say that they are old anyhow, because if they are from 1900, it is old time in Finland. Lönnroth rewrote Proverbs, but he was not the only one. Until 1960s, Proverbs were written. And it might be, I don't know, but it is often when we translate other proverbs to Finnish, we rewrote them somehow and use our real proverb form. But what then? It was also time when new modern ideas from Europe came to Finland. Very important for this was von Herder, Johann Gottfried von Herder. He was a pastor, point churchman, theologian, but he was also scholar of history. He was a polyscholar, language, literature, morality, and social theories. And all this background was in Immanuel Kant's ideas in many ways. But dedicating oneself to patriotic activity was great human food for Herder. He thought that by losing one's patriotism, one would lose oneself, and with it, the world next to oneself. In his neo-humanism, it influenced the status of folklore and its importance for the development of people in the meaning of folk. So if we lose our patriotism, we lose a part of us, and our patriotism is combined with the existence around us. I know that, for example, in Estonia, Herder is much more known and longer known than in Finland. In Finland, we of course we have known, but for example, with Proverbs, we haven't used it before. The most important was his climate theory. Geography, climate, and history, they create our living conditions, easy to understand today. But when we put it there also thinking and language, we can't, sorry to say, but it is, for me anyhow, it is not clear how we could think without language. Language meaning here science. It comes, we have to construct somehow. But what more was important for Finland was that each culture is unique. I come back to the next slide. Although man, according to Herder, is dependent on natural conditions, he is not determined by conditions. And the climate does not force, but bends. Before him, it was in the 18th century, David Hume noted the differences in people's way of thinking and using language. In most cases, David Hume said that the differences reflected different environments and natural conditions, living conditions, much more than a difference between folks, natures, and this. Folk poetry was, from that time, folk poetry has been seen as an expression to the collective memory of the people. It was not only poetry. And the folk character here is nature of the people, nature of the folk. Its civilization and customs manifest itself in the native language. This is quite hard to say like, okay. Language is an expression of the entire intellectual life of the people, its civilization, worldview, and perceptions. Hard things to say like this, because this also makes that people who don't use the same understandable language as we do are in a lower level. And the history was also included customs, beliefs, narratives, also the events that are reserved in poetry in the mythical form. And this made the national folk character national character. This was not the first time in Finland. Also, Morgonbladet Arvidsson had told about that. But he wrote that on nationalitet och national anda. He said, the nature and the character of this people is civilization, and customs manifest itself in the native language. And the intellectual. Lönnrot doesn't seem to have much interested in making any major all-encompassing generalizations about Finnish folk, man and Finnishness, although sketching out the characteristics of different tribes now and then their differences. As an example, it was one German professor, Philip Friedrich Arnold, who wanted information of the mental and bodily characteristics of the Finnish family in particular. The first letter, supposedly Lönnrot, does not seem to have taken it very seriously, but does list 20 different points that spontaneously came to his mind. He urged to this professor to go through the whole Finnish proverbial tradition, because it will find help according to him. Secondly, he points out that the folk nature of the Finns, so-called national character, will be inspected in relation to the nature and political conditions that influence it. This means that he was not uninformed about Herder's ideas about that, and Lönnrot this way attached itself to the same tradition with Herder. And actually this national character idea went on quite long, also with our different so-called tribes, different parts of Finland. People from Eastern Finland are this kind of, Western Finland, this kind. And actually, if you think Finland, compared with Finland, was the book of our country by Topelius. He highlighted these Herder's points, natural conditions, as one factor determining nationality. This also, okay, I don't know, maybe, yeah. But the right to own language and culture makes the opportunity to realize own history. And this is the point that small nationalities turn to Herder's climate theory. Because every nation and people must have the right to their own language and culture, and the opportunity to play a central role in Herder's thinking. And due to the variety of nature, civilization and culture, every nation and people, folk can, according to Herder's relativistic thinking, carry out humanity in different ways and at different times, and therefore each nation has its own history. The cultures of all nations, despite their differences, are equal. Beautifully said, but then we sent also from Finland, we sent a lot of missionaries, for example, especially to Africa to tell our culture and way of living.
Lisa, now it is, you have used 22 minutes. So
yes, I know.
Yep.
Yes, thank you. Yes, connection with others. And this was about that Proverbs were edited to, especially Proverbs. And then we have the national identity, the relationship of the people to the nature. So we are very much doing with the nature because we are, our life is depending on coincidence that recorded Proverbs show nature. It was also so why it is collected and why they are used. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. This was very interesting. And I think, do you hear?
Yeah, I hear.
Anyway, to speak about patriotism and Proverbs, because and our history about this, well, like in Finnish people have been a little culture, and nowadays we have also those cultures who want to have their language known and like that. So they may have same kind of history, maybe ahead of them. And if there are some people who want to ask something, there is. Irina Timoni says that those are beautiful thoughts. Irina Timoni from Hungary. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that Hungary had the same time and same paradigm in that way, because it was okay. Hungary has been a part of very big.
Yeah. Kind of.
Sorry.
So we have a little time really here for questions or comments. I can't see, of course, I can't see the Villa Gale.
You can, if you put the chat there down where you have, if you have shared screen.
Now I see. Now I see. Yeah. Christian, chat and here is.
Yes. Yeah, but if you put the chat, there are.
I see the chat also. Yeah.
But there is nothing people, now.
There are Fionnuala and Teresa and Karin Johansson. They are saying hello there, but
yeah.
What about?
Ask you out in something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I could comment. Say that
we can question discussion.
So, oops, what happened?
Hey, nothing. Can you hear me?
Yep. So about this identity and self-confidence of some of a people or nation. I can imagine that people can say that we have a beautiful country, like Lisa said, that Finland is a beautiful country, and that's why we have beautiful ideas too. So, yeah. So it is about self-confidence also. This, so we have beautiful proverbs and like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it is self-confidence. It's a wrong kind of self-confidence. It's a rakkaus. We are loving ourselves so much that we are better than others. That gives.
But it doesn't mean that it is better. But if you are confident, so you can say that. Yeah, like that.
Yeah. But our nation is not only one language, not only one living.
Yeah, that's true also. Yeah.
Yes, even we are a small country. We have nowadays 7 languages that are counted as state languages and like this. So this is not so little.
Yeah,
we are only 5 million people and 7 of some kind of official languages.
In our history, it was so that we wanted to show the world that we are not a lower race, like we are not Mongolians. It was a worse thing.
But it was not Finnish folk that wanted to say. It was the upper classes speaking Swedish who wanted
but
okay, thank you very much. I think that now
now it is time to turn to the Villa Gale and to Marius volunteer.
Bye-bye.
So Marius, I don't see you, but I know you are there.
Hey guys, I have not got a link to this today's YouTube. Please send it to me.
Yes, you can hear me. So, good morning.
Yep.
Good morning,
No,
Uti.
Marius. Yeah.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, may I start? Okay. So, good morning. I'm glad that I can be here again in Tavira. So, welcome to my presentation, all the participants online and on-site. During waiting for the PowerPoint I have prepared, I would like to say I'm a psychologist, so I will try to highlight more applicative aspects, but it's necessary and it's important to have this theoretical knowledge about Proverbs. And the topic of my presentation will deal with what is in our mind when we use Proverbs, what is in our mind when we create Proverbs, what is in our mind when we hear Proverbs. And I will deal with phenomena of depression and how Proverbs may influence how our, Lisa mentioned, collective memory can influence our individual, personal, autobiographical memory by Proverbs. Yeah? And I will introduce a new concept of paremioscript as well. So last time I asked the question whether we recognize Proverbs, optimistic and pessimistic ones. I did a study, research, empirical research, and I have received a good confirmation of this phenomena of understanding optimism and pessimism in Proverbs. It was easier to me because I was with my wife. Yeah, we presented together. This year I'm alone. It will be more difficult, but I will do my best and hope you will get the idea. So I will talk about the experience of a lot of people that struggle with depression now, yeah, especially in pandemic times. So it's very applicative, yeah, to understand how the language influences us. And formal aspects of this presentation is that at first I will try to highlight the general idea so you can pick up the main issues, and then in a spiral way I will come back to extend some assumptions of my idea for the research, because the most important aspect is psychometric, statistical, empirical support for the idea that yes, we have in our mind mental scripts that resemble formally and functionally the proverbs that we use. So that's, and first, after this theoretical background, I will tell about the method, how I answered this question, this problem, and then we'll show results. And if I have enough time, then I will also go to more statistical issues, but I did it in a very friendly way. If not, I have also a shorter version. So we have talked a lot about proverbs, yeah, about this phenomena of using. I gave more text so you could follow also reading. If somebody maybe does not hear me well. And the idea of my research was that depression is sometimes understood in an individual way, neglecting cultural context. And what is culture? Culture is language, and language is immediately related with Proverbs, was what also Lisa has presented about Finnish culture and relation with Proverbs. So knowing this relation, I developed, I looked for in the literature the concepts that would allow us to conceptualize this idea, and the concept of cultural life scripts, yeah, developed by Lyotard, by Bernstein, and the concept of Shank Abelson from psychology of mental script was used in my study to justify the way how I developed this creation of the test. And to create a test in psychology is a good justification about the variable that really exists. Usually the test should measure something real, and what the test I have created measures is proverb thinking, and we have empirical evidence for that. So in my study I used two groups of people. In the first stage 300, in the second 500, to develop this questionnaire of optimism and pessimism based on proverbs. And then I also used other psychometric tool to see the validity. The validity is the most important word for my study. to what extent the concept of proverb thinking and the tool based on this concept is valid. I didn't want to create something artificial idea, but what really is justified with statistics, yeah? The evidence, the generalization of experience of using proverbs, which is highlighted also in statistics. That's why I used the commonly used test for depressiveness inventory, and also commonly used in psychology, psychometry test for measuring optimism, which is life orientation test by Scheyer. And finally, it always about personality, so I also use as a third tool test to measure Big Five, our personality profile. And from psychometrical view, I wanted to test the structural validity, convergence and incremental validity, and theoretical validity. And these are psychometric concepts, but all is about does my test measure what I supposed to measure? Yeah? And also reliability, to what extent the test that I apply is reliable, to what extent it says, like a reliable temperature measurement or the length measurement, to what extent it's reliable, the watch, is it reliable or not? And I built an interesting, I think, model of mediating our attitude of optimism and pessimism by proverbs influencing depressiveness. So between optimism, pessimism, and depressiveness, I put proverb and measure that. And in my quantitative studies, I confirmed that proverbs and depression related with proverbs confirm the cultural aspects of depressiveness. Yeah? And also I showed that proverbs function as mediators in this relationship between optimism and pessimism measured by life orientation test and depressiveness measured by Beck depressiveness scale. And in the middle, these optimistic, pessimistic proverbs, which I positioned. Yeah? And also about this aspect, theoretical aspects, I used the concept of grand narrative and grand narrative collective memory, because grand narrative is our heritage, is our experience which is collected, gathered. It's one of the concepts used in sociology, but also in anthropology. And I would say that this grand narrative refers to small narrative or short narrative. It's also the concept which is in the literature. And I have coined the concept of paremiological ego. Yeah? What is my self-stories, life script, which might be called my paremiological ego. I haven't met this concept. Maybe it exists, but I haven't met, if I find, but if not, I would like to use it because it reflects well my idea. So language can be a cage, but it can also be a scaffolding to help us change. And if language is proverbs, we can use, this is this applicative. I do not run this research just for fun. I just think how we can help to better understand what's going on in our mind. And this scaffold, which can be built on paremioscripts or proverbs, that's the idea. And you probably know this saying by René Descartes, in Polish, René Descartes, I think, yeah, it should be said, that we think it makes us human, but I also paid attention that in all languages we have pronoun, the first, me, you, he. And the first pronoun assumes self-speech, I and what I think about myself. And interestingly, in depression, this I narratives activity is activated. We much more often use the I expressions, I narratives. So we are a little bit more narcissistic, but the concept of polyphony and dialogical self is very active in depression. And it might be very good to see what are these proverb-like narratives inside to better understand depression. Yeah? And sure, we can say that we have not the direct insight what's in the mind. You have this experience that we don't know what people have. Yeah? We are sitting here, we can look at us, but we don't know what is inside. Yeah? Maybe the situation like here, not very nice thoughts. And I wanted to know it. Yeah? Maybe I'm not humble enough, but I tried to get insight inside. Huh? So the concept, this paremioscript idea is crucial to understand how we can measure mental scripts. This is the link between proverb and this script, paremioscript. I have already introduced this concept last year, but now I have done one step forward. And instead of the discussion, what are proverbs, how to define them, I prefer to talk about the activity of using proverbs, this proverb thinking. So not the proverb, but to proverb, this functional pragmatic approach, which in my study is more important. Yeah, I don't diminish the importance of, but all paremiologists are struggling to define the comprehensive definition that, it's not so easy. But all I agree with functions of proverbs, the descriptive, explanatory, and also prescriptive functions of proverbs. So that was my idea, and the first. And the secondly, I put it in this cultural perspective to test the validity of proverb as a cultural carrier, as carrying culture that influences individual memory. And even in the concept of paroimia, we have to express something in a different way. So this experience is somehow encapsulated in more abstract, metaphorical way in proverb, paraoimos, different way. And it's a good understanding of this mental DNA, which is somehow rooted in this experience. Okay, so maybe not too much about defining this phenomena. Now let's go a little bit in direction what's going on in the depressive mind. Yeah? Optimism and pessimism is the best feature to describe depressive persons. You have seen we can easily indicate observing or listening the person, whether it's depressive or optimistic person. Even if we give some examples of proverbs and then we would ask with which proverb your experience correlate, or which experience imprinted in proverb is yours. And some would see this glass as full, and some would see this glass as empty, because of this experience related with autobiographical memory, with mental scripts underlying this memory and the mindset that they have while they are optimist or pessimist, depressive or in maniacal stage, because it deals with affective disorders. And examples of these, just a few examples, I have 40 proverbs related with optimism, pessimism. That was a long study with 15 competent judges. Is, for instance, there is no bad that wouldn't turn out into good. Everyone is the architect of their own fortune. By the way, I also wanted to capture not only optimism, pessimism, but also temporal perspective, because I think that some proverbs refer more to the past, some more to the future. So this temporal structure of our self is also imprinted in proverbs. And some are just about present. So we might have, that's an idea of my next study that I'm going to run. I have already contacted with Philip Zimbardo. He was a creator of a new test, the time paradox, and the test measuring temporal perspective, and he liked a lot the idea. So maybe next time I will present Next idea. And last time I told you, you know, proverb reflect culture, as Peter Bruegel did in this 16th century culture imprinted in 118 proverbs. Yeah? But now I paid especially attention to these are false scripts, because he described 118 falses or dysfunctional behavior. These are only falses of all this behavior. And my analogy is depression is also false thoughts, dysfunctional, destructive thoughts, like this one here, yeah, that we prefer to influence the wind instead of setting up our sails that we can influence, yeah, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, to break the wall. And so this is a nice example by Peter Bruegel. These 118 numbers with falses of his culture, of Flemish culture of 16th century. He was a friend of Erasmus of Rotterdam. He knew very well human nature. So what is this new concept of paremoscript? This is a proverb-like expression. It resembles like ready-to-use at the end of my tongue solutions, no? Something that is coming first when we try to deal with the problem. Yeah? It's very aim-oriented. We solve the problem by this paremoscript. And some people have more sticking to more the optimistic and some to more destructive ones. They are powerful because they have value. They motivate us. They say about self-confidence, like in maybe some proverbs, yeah, as we finish example. They are conventional, they are so powerful because they are repeated, this collective wisdom speaks by them. And they also may describe a category of people. We have different national cultures. We have also these passports to understand this culture by certain proverbs, like Japanese or Chinese or my home, my castle, English, Great Britain. So you know the idea. And finally, it's a mental program. This is the ingredient of the psychological cognitive aspects of this script which is inside. And we have developed already this conceptual idea, and now I decided to create especially for you a picture to highlight very briefly my idea. So culture, people, the group and individual, culture and person, that was the link that I was interested in. Culture is a kind of collective memory by Halbwachs. It was also used by Lisa, this concept of collective memory. And analogically, we have individual's memory, our autobiographical memory, which is also the link invisible. We don't know how it works. I wanted to answer this question, how it works, this collective memory and individual which is immersed in this collective memory. And the concept of cultural life scripts with personal life scripts. This idea from the literature helped me to create the model. And of course, in the first study 2 years ago, I understood whether optimistic and pessimistic proverbs capture optimism and pessimism. In the second study, I wanted to understand the personal life scripts and the mindset, trying to understand depressive mind. And I have introduced the concept of pessimistic paremoscripts and optimistic. We don't see that. Paremoscript is something inside. I assume there is entity, very mental entity, which is a link with culture. Which is a link with culture. But I have developed how this paremoscript influences on depression. So this is the core of my second study, to better understand this mindset. I think we are a little bit responsible for our paremoscripts. This is both way relation. The mindset produces parameoscripts, but also the parameoscripts we fuel in our mind can influence our mindset. And these parameoscripts influence our memory, individual memory. So this is my idea. And if I had more time, because I thought 20 minutes, then I would develop more statistical aspects of, and I was inspired by this man, Rui, yesterday, because he used Proverbs in mathematics. So yesterday in the evening, I thought, why not doing statistics with Proverbs? And I did it with Proverbs. So if you give me 5 minutes, is it okay?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So all these hard concepts, psychometric concepts, underlies that quality is quantity. If we can measure something, then we have evidence. And that was the idea of these two-stage studies and the concept of construct validity. What is construct validity? Construct validity refers to our observations and measurements, specifically whether a test can reasonably be considered to reflect the intended construct, our proverb thinking. And we look for latent variable, not visible one, by testing the construct validity. Is it valid or not? By the test that we construct. And this incremental validity, which is part of test validity, may be expressed in a proverb: one swallow doesn't make a spring, but we can increase validity by adding a new test. So life orientation test plus a new test I have created should increase the predictive power of the two tests. And we confirmed statistically that yes, that one swallow not, but we have many swallows now to predict depression. And we did it with incremental validity to predict. And then there is a convergent and discriminant validity. And convergent validity refers to the degree to which the measures that theoretically should be related are related. So I did the second analysis. Do they correlate? And yes, I have statistical numbers. I can send it to you. That they are correlated, highly correlated ones. And in my first study with this 300 persons group, I tried to see, do we recognize from the group of proverbs pessimism and optimism? Because explanatory factor analysis is based on correlations. So I think if you have friends, you would sit together here because of the friendship. So the same explanatory factor analysis is looking for clusters, concentrations. And the rule that is guiding these correlations is, for instance, my experience of optimism, pessimism in the proverbs that I am assessing now. So birds of same feather flock together. So, and after this analysis, I have received 4 concentrations, 4 factors, and this screen plot resembles that these 4 factors explains majority of variance. So it must be something why there are these 4 concentrations, and I have correlated these 4 factors with depressiveness scale. To see whether they correlate or not correlate with these. And correlating these 4, I have met 2, the first and the third factor, that correlate negatively with depressiveness by Beck depressiveness scale, and very positively with Beck's depressiveness scale. So these 2 factors, and they were clear optimism and pessimism. So that was the result of explanatory factor analysis. And also the reliability was really acceptable, was fine. These 2 indicators of alpha Cronbach alpha is totally satisfying, which is promising for the new tool. And then regression analysis, the next proverb that explains, well, practice makes perfect. If we practice, then we can expect good future. And in Poland we have not nice word, baba z wozu koniom lżej. Eva is not present. She talked about the representation of women. It is not nice. So regression analysis can explain whether something is influencing on something. And with this analysis, I could predict depressiveness by 2 subscales of the new test that I have created. So using this test, I can say whether the person is depressive or not. Okay, yeah, I think I will land. Maybe not everything is interesting. The last picture that I would like to show you, there are many bad, dirty words, statistical words like model fit, because I wanted to confirm from the first study to the second study whether people do recognize the model of 8 proverbs, split it into optimism and pessimism. So in confirmatory analysis, I did confirm well that even new groups recognize the same 2 scales with 8 proverbs, 4. And the comparative fit indicators, CFI, and all these are very satisfying. So I have really strong evidence, psychometric evidence, that yes, our mind operates with proverbs, let's say with parameoscripts, so to sum up. And finally, I have a picture now, and I think that's the most important, mediation analysis. On the left side, we have the results of life orientation test, which is based on 2 subscales, optimism and pessimism. And there is a correlation between that. Unfortunately, you can't see the indicators, but we can predict depressiveness by optimism and pessimism of this old test, light orientation test by Shire. But now we have a new test which is mediating variable between optimism, pessimism, our mind, these parameoscripts, positive parameoscripts and negative parameoscripts, and depressiveness. And I will tell you that this direct effect is lower than the indirect effect. It's 0.31, 0.19, and here is 0.17, 0.28. So we have stronger tool to predict depressiveness with proverbs. I think it's a very important moment that we have proverbs as an evident tool, mental device that can say about depression. And I will work on it in the future. Okay, so I have consumed my time. Yes, that's all.
Yes, you have.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very much.
Do you hear me? Yeah. Anyway, I thank you as others, and I want to read you Luis Tocina's comment here. In Spanish, we have better the evil you know than the good you might find out about. And he thinks that this is really pessimistic way to say and kind of pessimistic proverb. So did you get this, which I said, this better the evil you know than the good you might find out about? So
yes, I think we have many examples of this optimism and pessimism.
So I want to, I prefer to say you that I was very interested in your plans to use this temporal part of this optimism and pessimism, because actually I graduated in social psychology, and one of my works was about fatalism. And you know that in this is also one thing you can combine to this optimism, pessimism, and this is also how you think about future, and it is very important, I think, in this
yes,
depression also.
Yeah, thank you,
What do you
Uti.
think?
The last word. I analyze memory because the future is important for me. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and our next speaker is Paola Attolino, also there. Please.
Good morning. Good morning, Otti.
Hi.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here for the first time, and I want to thank, first of all, Rui and Marinella for their proverbial hospitality and kindness. And I'm also very happy to be here to share with you some thoughts, some considerations about a very delicate issue that is close to my heart. The pointer, yes, is here. Sorry, maybe. It is not working. I'm sorry. Okay, the green one. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and so I would like to start with this image that maybe you have seen. It is a cover of the New Yorker, issue June 2020, and the picture has a name. The name is Say Their Names. And for the artist who created this picture, Kadir Nelson, the body of George Floyd, that, as we sadly know, was killed a month before by a police officer in Minneapolis, embodies the history of violence inflicted upon Black people and Black bodies in particular. And I guess it would be hard for us to say their names, but maybe you can recognize the face and the body of Martin Luther King, of Malcolm X, of Rodney King, of the sadly known whipped Peter, the very sad picture of whipped Peter, or also the so-called unnamed, so the many slaves that were sold in dozens. And the emphasis is interesting because it is on the Black body. And as this author and journalist, Ta-Nehisi Coates, wrote in a very beautiful book in 2015, America understands itself as God's handiwork, but the Black body is the clearest evidence that America is the work of man. And this is indeed thought-provoking. And this phrase, I can't breathe, has become a sort of slogan indeed. And these are George Floyd's last words, and he helplessly repeated these words 11 times while the policeman was kneeling on his neck. And this sentence has become a slogan of the protest that exploded in and also outside the United States. And this image that you can see, the one on your right, evokes the words that James Baldwin wrote in 1963. And the words are, "It demands great spiritual resilience not to hate the hater whose foot is on your neck." It was written in 1963. And what I would like to do here with you tomorrow is just to share with you an overview of some phraseological units on some phraseology, linked to the African American protest in the US. But above all, to focus on how some of the slogans created have become a part of US and sometimes of global phraseological heritage. And I would like to invite you to follow me in this sort of flow of thoughts, so trying to find the links between some of these phraseological units and between them and society in its different aspects. And as to methodology, I have adopted a qualitative approach with newspaper and social media in particular as the main sources, and speech act theory and critical discourse analysis as the main tools. And so just let's start with the first connection between I have a dream and I can't breathe. And of course, we all know that I Have a Dream comes from the title and the anaphora of one of the most iconic speeches in American history, a public speech delivered by Martin Luther King in 1963 during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And it is very interesting to notice that this is a sort of legacy of hope, because after almost 60 years, Martin Luther King's words are referred to whenever there is a dream to fulfill. That's to say, always. We always have a dream to fulfill. But they are, of course, particularly significant for African Americans. And it is not a coincidence that the very voice of Martin Luther King has been sampled in many rap songs. For example, the one by Chicago's rapper Common in 2006. And I would kindly ask the guys to click on the link to let you listen just a short extract of the song. Maybe the audio? Sorry, some technical. I think it is enough. Thank you very much. Just to let you listen to Martin Luther King's voice sampled in a rap song, and so there is this creation, and this, and it is common in very many songs. So we can stop it. Thank you very much, and come back to the presentation. And it is also interesting that the very same rapper, Common, 1 year later, will endorse Barack Obama's candidacy. And of course, there is a connection between Martin Luther King and the first black president. It is inevitable. And for somebody, as you can read, Obama is the dream. But unfortunately, it is not the case, because we have to come back to this slide and to highlight that I Can't Breathe, that, as I told you before, were the last words by George Floyd in 2020, as a sentence dates to 2014, when Obama was president. And these words do not come from a public speech, from a memorable speech like I Have a Dream, but from the imploring cry of another African-American man, Eric Garner, that you can see in the picture on your right, who was killed in New York after a white police officer put him in a prohibited chokehold while arresting him for selling illegal cigarettes. And I Can't Breathe entered the Yale Book of Quotations, which is this collection of quotations that editor Fred Shapiro tries to trace to their original sources as far as possible. Entered this Yale Book of Quotation as the most notable phrase in 2014. And in fact, Shapiro relied on a sort of gut sense that I Can't Breathe wouldn't be an ephemeral slogan, but rather a phrase with real and lasting impact, and he was right. And in fact, he said that the morning after the grand jury decision not to indict the white police officer in the death of Eric Garner, Shapiro saw news coverage of protesters turning Garner's final words into a rallying cry. This in 2014, and we know what happened before. And from a linguistic point of view, I Can't Breathe is such a basic utterance, because in fact we have this verb, breathe, which is such a basic verb. And the utterance I can't breathe, as linguist Ben Zimmer wrote, finds Garner on the precipice between the breath and death. And the pronoun I, and there is an interesting connection here with what Marius said before, talking about the pronoun I as self-narrative. In this case, it has a completely different function because it works as an expression of mass empathy, this pronoun I. And I makes people step into Eric Garden for a moment as an expression of solidarity. And so in this way, I can breathe as a slogan, as a sentence, as a phrase, becomes social action. So it becomes a form of social action in which both celebrities and common people take part. And in some cases, I is modified into more inclusive we. And so the action of breathing becomes more metaphorical. And there are also some cases in which the metaphor of breath is extended beyond the physical realm, functioning as a meta-force, not only a metaphor, but also a meta-force. That's to say, a force that goes beyond physical entities, with expressions that are possible in English with a pun, American breathe, or democracy can't breathe, so not a physical entity that can breathe. And indeed, the pronoun I has long been a linguistic instrument of protest. And to give some example, you can see this picture where the I am a man sandwich birds are portrayed. I am a man was the slogan of the sanitation worker strikes in Memphis in 1968, where Martin Luther King was killed some months before. And it is also interesting a further connection between I am a man and a very old slogan, am I not a man or a brother, that you can see in this medallion in the middle, that was created in 1787 by an English potter and abolitionist, and then was sent to Benjamin Franklin, Pennsylvania, where it became a fashion icon. It was worn by abolitionists. And perhaps it is interesting also to highlight that perhaps the most famous use of I as an expression of mass empathy, as I was telling before, is a fictional one. Maybe you remember a movie, a 1960 movie, Spartacus, by director Stanley Kubrick. And it is interesting that there is this iconic scene where Spartacus is protected by his fellow slaves when they all shout, I am Spartacus, to shield him from being singled out by the Romans for punishment. And if it's possible, I would like to show just a little bit of this scene, iconic scene.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
Thank you very much. We can come back to the presentation. And so you have recognized Kirk Douglas and Tony Curtis. And there's a scene also inspired real-life gestures of solidarity, as when we hear or read, I am Trayvon Martin, or with another black kid, killed by a white officer, or more recently, I am George Floyd, or even in French, Je suis Charlie, referring to Charlie Hebdo, the tragedy of the Charlie Hebdo magazine. And just as a quick digression, it is interesting to point out that the press has recently adopted the expression I am Spartacus moment, referring to a senator who used this expression referring to a particular case. And so it is also a sentence that is used in the press as this I am Spartacus moment. And as to the personal pronoun we. Of course, we have the civil rights movement, which brought us "We Shall Overcome," the very famous song, an anthem in 1963. Which now is frequently used as a protest song or anti-racist event associated with Black Lives Matter movement. And it is interesting to point out that it didn't start as a protest song, and it was originally a gospel song, and the lyrics were written by a white musician and activist, Pete Seeger, who also wrote another very famous song, "If I Had a Hammer," and the title of this song is another slogan used during protest in the 60s and more recently too. And in fact, the song was performed collectively during 1963 March on Washington. And one of the best known performer was a singer Odetta, who also put in music "Give a Damn," which is another provocative 1975 slogan of the New York Urban Coalition, aimed at solving the problems of disadvantaged black. And so, just to go on, we can also say that "I Can't Breathe" is used very often as a slogan into a sometime inflated hashtag, with this particular sign of the hashtag. And in this way, we can say that it bears all the features of social media so-called slacktivism, which is a blend term between slacker, who is a very lazy person, and activism. That it is also called hashtag activism. And just to have give you an idea of this, here there is a shot from Google Trends research. You know that Google Trend is a tool by the anonymous search engine that, using graphs, analyzes the popularity of top search queries on Google. And here we can see that in a time span of around 7 years, we have these two peaks, one in December 2014 and the other in June 2020. And it is not a coincidence, because in December 2014, there was just the grand jury decision not to indict the murderer of Eric Gardner, and in June 2020 we are in the aftermath of George Floyd killing. But the word slacktivism evokes another slogan that entered this time global phraseology, and maybe it can be considered sort of baby proverb, to use the expression that Professor Mieder gave us last Monday. And this is, the revolution will not be televised. Don't know if you ever heard of this. It is the title of a 1970 powerful song, or rather than song, it was a spoken word by Gil Scott-Heron, and has become a mantra for revolution all over the world. Here we have a couple of examples. On the left, it is used as 2003 as the title of a 2003 documentary film on the 2002 coup d'etat attempt in Venezuela. And in this time it is used in a completely different environment. So a 2016 documentary film on the social movement, translatable as "We Can't Take It Anymore," during Senegal's 2011 presidential election. And it is also interesting that the slogan, "the television will not be televised," besides being adopted, has also been adapted, as we can see here, where television is replaced by Twitter, with sometimes contrasting opinions. But we can say that, in a sense, the revolution has been televised, because the world knew about what happened to George Floyd because a girl filmed it, and her video spurred protests around the world, and images of these protests broadcasted on the screens all over the world. And indeed, the Black Lives Matter movement has gone on to renew faith in direct grassroots action. And this is also what the same Gilles Scotero explained, that his song is what not about, in particular, the role of mass media, of television at the time, but about finding revolution within oneself. And the same slogan, Black Lives Matter, was born as a hashtag in 2013. It was coined by a young lady, Alicia Garza, a domestic worker rights activist. And after the known guilty verdict against George Zimmerman, who was the man who shot dead this young boy, Trayvon Martin, in 2012, she posted this missive on Facebook, that it is written here on the left, and then it became the hashtag Black Lives Matter, and so this slogan that we all know. And it is, of course, a slogan that bounces also as a topical allusion. And an example is this 2016 episode of Black Jeopardy. I'm not sure you know this TV show, which is a parody of the very known quiz Jeopardy, which is one of the most famous in the United States. And it is interesting because it is about black identity. And in fact, it features a contest among 3 challengers. 2 are black and 1 is the odd one out, generally a white guy. And in this episode, we have Tom Hanks as the 3rd contestant. But interestingly, this time he fit what is happening, but not in a case that I will show you. If we can go with the short video.
I have to say, it has been a pleasure.
Well, right back at you, my brother.
All right, well, let's take a look at our final Jeopardy category, Lives That Matter. Well, it was good while it lasted, Doug.
I got a lot to say about this.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. When we come back.
So you can see that Lives That Matter there's a sort of topical allusion to what are lives that matter, in this case, Black Lives Matter. And so there's a sort of interracial harmony comes to an end when the host announces there's a category.
I have to say, it has been a pleasure.
It is, okay. And Black Lives Matter as a slogan is inextricably linked to social justice. And in 2020, after the killing of George Floyd, Washington, D.C. mayor renamed the street in front of the White House Black Lives Matter Plaza, and had the slogan painted in giant yellow letters that you can see in this picture. So the street leading to the White House. And local activists immediately audit another slogan because they changed the DC flag into an equal sign and wrote "Defund the Police," which is also a pun with "defend the police." And as a result, the full message read "Black Lives Matter equals defund the police." And it is also interesting that this message is so huge, the letters are so huge that it can be read from space. And in fact, here you can see a satellite picture, and this creates a further connection in our mind, the one with another slogan by Gilles Scotero, "Whitey on the Moon." And this slogan has been recently revisited by the press, Whitey on the Moon, in July 2021, so very recently, when some rich people went on space, and all the polemics about giving in the space during pandemic, and so it was revisited by the press. And in July 2021, we have seen also these pictures on newspapers. And we are talking, of course, of another slogan. These pictures that are the pictures of another slogan, which is called as "Taking a Knee." And what about this gesture? It is, of course, a gesture of solidarity, of closeness to the Black Lives Matter movement, but it was born in the field of sport because it dates to 2016, when the football champion Colin Kaepernick, that you can see here, during the performance of the national anthem, knelt instead of standing on attention. And he did this just as Martin Luther King, with, of course, the due differences, did in 1965. And he did this to protest against the abuses of the American police towards African Americans. And a few months later, rapper Nick Cannon voiced Colin Kaepernick's silent protest by offering a vigorous spoken word example in the rap song Stand for What. Now, there is also the link here, but maybe, I'm not sure if I have enough time to show you this link too.
Yes, you have 4 minutes, but then there are no
okay, so I think I will skip. So it is interesting to point out that in this rap song, Stand for Word, he says, you want me to stand for a song that continues to remind me of all the harms that have done me wrong. And it is really interesting to point out that there is, of course, this link between the Stand for Word and this other very famous speech delivered by Frederick Douglass, one of the leaders of the abolitionist movement in 1852, when he said, and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems. And this speech is known with the title, "This 4th of July is not yours, it's mine." Sorry, it's not mine, it's yours. Or it's yours, not mine. And indeed, it is also used in many other cases, for example, by the same Colin Kaepernick a couple of years ago during the celebration of the American Independence Day, the 4th of July. And sport is not new to social protest. We know about this. I'm pretty sure you are familiar with the picture on your right. It is a very, very famous picture, and it dates back to the Olympic Games in Mexico in 1968. And in this case, we have people who are standing for something. So there is a different way of standing. And in fact, it is not visible, but the badge that they wear reads, "I'll stand with you," in particular the one worn by Australian Peter Norman. But maybe it is less known another protest by, another form of protest by another athlete in 1968, so during the Mexico City Olympics. Lew Alcindor, the basketball player, also known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who boycotted the Olympic Games, saying that this is how I made my stand. So once again, we have a different use of stand. So I make my stand in this way. And why? Because in 1967, a no dunking rule was adopted. I don't know if you are familiar with the basket, but dunking is that gesture of basketball player when they just put the ball directly into the basket. And of course, it is easier for black athletes. And in fact, this no dunking, dunking rule was renamed the Alcindor rule because it was considered against this black player. And he protested boycotting the Olympic Games, but also very interesting, just because of this prohibition, he invented something new, the unstoppable sky hook. His gesture that is legendary. And in this sense, it was a sort of making a way out of no way. And here we have this proverb, which is maybe one of the most performative proverbs in African American history. And as Professor Mieder said, it goes hand in hand with the proverbial dream of Martin Luther King. And it is a proverb that is very used in politics, as Professor Mieder says in his beautiful book with the same title. And it is interesting also to highlight that it was used also by Barack Obama in one speech in particular, symbolizing his own ability to perform this proverb, so to perform his ability to make a way out of no way. Because he used this proverb in the so-called race speech in a very delicate moment of his electoral campaign. So when the controversial sermon sound bites from Reverend Wright, who was Obama's pastor, had been spread all over the world as evidence of a sort of reversal racism in some way. And it is also interesting to notice that this proverb was mentioned also by late rapper Tupac, who said this long-standing African-American folk saying, that's to say, making a way out of no way, reflects the black struggle to survive against all odds. And it has also been modified in some way by hip-hop community into another saying, which is flipping something out of nothing, which is like underlying the so-called hip-hop genius, creative genius. And just in closing, I would like just to highlight that black protest slogans as expression of social and political dissent present both pragmatic legitimacy because they are recognizable as speech acts, but also convocativity as they may create different degrees of solidarity or distance. And as Martin Luther King said, with another powerful quote that resonates amid George Floyd's protest, a riot is the language of the unheard. And so maybe we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we have failed to hear? And I thank you for your attention. Obrigada.
Thank you, really, really. So I envy you there in Tavira. You can discuss during coffee break now, or is it coffee break? So we can't, I think, ask. You can look at also this discussion in YouTube if you like. Okay. Some people can show you. And thanks a lot. We had new concepts even here, like metaphors and like this. Thanks.
Thank you.
Vamos retomar os trabalhos desta manhã, começando por fazer uma referência que tem muita importância. Como todos sabem, a difusão deste colóquio está feita tanto para o nosso continente como para outros continentes cuja diferença horária é muito grande. E, naturalmente, uma das pessoas que se preocupou com isso foi o professor Mider, a quem eu referi que não haverá problema, porque mesmo que não possa seguir em direto estas comunicações, sobretudo da manhã, porque nos Estados Unidos ainda é muito cedo, então poderão depois segui-la exatamente nos órgãos de comunicação social, porque tudo ficará lá colocado. Ladies and gentlemen, we are continuing this part today, the second part of the morning, but before I want to remember you that this diffusion of our colloquium is over the world, and just at these sessions on the morning are very difficult to be followed by people in the United States, Argentina, and so on. But I'm just trying that there was one person concerned with this problem, but I must relax all people saying that after the colloquium, all will be available on the social networks. So please don't worry if you cannot follow mainly these presentations in the morning. Thank you very much.
Hello everybody, we must begin. Vamos então começar esta sessão iniciada às 11 horas e Sim. Bom, pronto, está resolvido. E vamos então iniciar, e começando por chamar aqui aos nossos serviços o nosso próximo orador, Aires de Carvalho, que nos traz o tema, os Objetivos de Desenvolvimento Sustentável, e que tem a ver com a pessoa que é e aquilo que ele desenvolve na vida profissional e, portanto, vamos ouvi-lo, se fazem favor.
Bom dia. My English is very bad, por isso I speak in português. Começava por agradecer o convite. E começava por um provérbio que aqui há um par de anos o professor Mider trouxe cá e que falava dos novos provérbios. Uma imagem vale mais que 1000 palavras. Nós temos estado a viver um tempo que essencialmente demonstra que o ser humano precisa de se adaptar a novas realidades e que às vezes com um bichinho pequeno ficamos todos com a vida atrapalhada. Nesse sentido, apareceram imagens novas. Nós estamos no espaço, estamos a proteger de vírus e estamos a proteger-nos de uma nova realidade que todos nós ainda estamos a descobrir e que vai demorar o seu tempo até nos conseguirmos adaptar. E nesse sentido, esta é uma imagem que retrata bem esse contexto. Outra é esta que nos acompanha há muitas décadas e que continua a ser, infelizmente, uma realidade. A água cada vez mais vai ser um bem escasso, falarei disso daqui a pouco, mas para já fica a imagem daquilo que vai marcando os nossos dias, mas que já marca há várias décadas. Os Objetivos do Desenvolvimento Sustentável, essencialmente, são um programa global de governo que as Nações Unidas concretizou com vários 190 países, que cada um à sua medida vai tentando cumprir e vai tentando desenvolver. Estamos a falar de uma realidade a várias velocidades, que tem muitas particularidades, porque cumprir objetivos do desenvolvimento sustentável na Europa não é seguramente igual a cumprir objetivos na América do Norte ou na América do Sul ou em África. Estamos a falar de caminhos e percursos diferentes e dificuldades diferentes. E nesse contexto, os Objetivos de Desenvolvimento Sustentável lançam-nos o desafio de também sermos mais solidários. Se há alguma coisa este vírus parecia trazer quando apareceu, era que íamos ser todos mais solidários. Já percebemos que isso não vai ser assim e que as coisas vão mudar, mas vão mudar pela força dos acontecimentos e não pela nossa solidariedade, infelizmente. Este não é propriamente um provérbio, é um dito popular, mas que explica um bocadinho aquilo que eu vou trazer aqui muito a correr. Eu tentei meter o recio na Rua da Petesga, mas não sei se vou conseguir esse objetivo de alguma maneira. Vamos tentando ir fazendo o caminho, porque este é um caminho importante e que diz respeito a todos nós. Este é um primeiro objetivo, eu não os vou tratar todos por ordem, vou tratar alguns mais para o final, apesar deles aparecerem no início, mas este, em primeiro lugar, porque nos marca as nossas vidas e continua a marcar as nossas sociedades. Continuamos a assobiar para o lado em função deste objetivo. Supostamente até 2030 teríamos que erradicar a pobreza do mundo. O que é facto é que este vírus veio agravar a pobreza no mundo e veio agravar mais as desigualdades. Se houve altura em que até alguns remediados passaram a ser pobres, foi nesta altura da pandemia. Pela primeira vez viu-se, por exemplo, dentistas a irem pedir apoio aos bancos alimentares. É uma das realidades que ficou marcada com este tempo que estamos a viver. Este é aquele que marca, de facto, e marca também os novos pobres, porque há pobres que, essencialmente, tendo e recebendo o ordenado, não conseguem fazer face às suas despesas e às suas dificuldades, e passam muitas dificuldades, apesar de trabalharem todos os dias e de cumprirem os seus horários todos os dias. E este é um retrato que vamos tendo, infelizmente, em todo o lado. Normalmente, quando se tem aquilo que as pessoas chamam por natureza azar, recorre-se sempre ao divino, e então a pobreza é uma das questões que levanta sempre o divino e levanta sempre o apelo ao divino. E normalmente cativa sempre e trabalha sempre uma baixa autoestima que se agrava à medida que o tempo passa. Normalmente quem é pobre baixa a sua autoestima e passa a ter vários problemas, até de saúde mental, e isso ficou bem patente agora neste tempo que estamos a viver. E quando se cai em desgraça, normalmente vão-se perdendo inclusivamente os amigos. E este é um dos provérbios que nos diz claramente essa realidade, porque pobre e preso, pois não tem amigos normalmente, ou tem poucos. E esta é uma realidade também que nos acompanha há muitas décadas, desde o tempo em que vivíamos não em democracia, mas em ditadura, que é o pobre aprendeu sempre a baixar a cabeça e, portanto, nesse contexto, continuamos a ter esse vício, e este provérbio marca essa realidade. E aqui é uma imagem do Alentejo, dos anos 30 e 40 do século passado, mas que retrata bem ainda muito daquilo que se vai vivendo e daquilo que se tem como realidade. Aqui era o trabalho no campo duro, em que se almoçava lá e levava-se o almoço nas cestas que estão ali, e que se fazia de alguma forma esse trabalho de sol a sol. E hoje alguns trabalham mais que o sol a sol. Está um bocadinho ligado a isto, este segundo objetivo, que é erradicar a fome e, de alguma forma, melhorar a segurança alimentar, a nutrição e promover uma agricultura sustentável. Aquilo que se chama o up local. Nós continuamos a querer importar da América Latina uns limões muito interessantes, umas frutas muito interessantes, e deixamos morrer os limoeiros lá do nosso quintal. Esta realidade, por muito que nos custe, tem que acabar. O preço do petróleo para os aviões não nos vai permitir continuar a fazer de conta que esta é uma realidade verdadeira, porque não é. Ninguém produz limões a 50 cêntimos o quilo. Ninguém. Alguém fica a perder no negócio. E quando o negócio não é bom para as duas partes, há qualquer coisa que não está bem. E, portanto, este up local vai ter que se dar e esta realidade vai ter que ser alterada. Vamos ter que começar a consumir das nossas hortas, dos nossos quintais. Como dizia alguém, as nossas vitaminas não se podem importar e virem por avião. Temos que as produzir no nosso quintal. E esta é uma das realidades que, de alguma forma, vai ter que acontecer. Esta era uma realidade que existia no Alentejo e continua hoje a ser uma realidade, mas hoje é gourmet. Hoje é uma realidade gourmet porque os cardos e as ervas passaram a estar na moda. Mas, para matar a fome, as pessoas comiam as ervas do campo. Comiam aquilo que hoje são cogumelos muito caros, que são as chilarcas, matavam a fome com as chilarcas que ninguém queria saber porque ninguém sabia o que era. E, portanto, eram descobertas pelos porcos e, portanto, alimentavam muita gente com esta realidade. Esta é uma realidade, a das ervas aromáticas e a das ervas para fazer sopas, que é transversal às zonas pobres e o Alentejo tem muito disso. Aqui é uma realidade que toda a gente conhece, porque quando não há, todos têm ideias, mas depois falta o resto, falta a capacidade de resolver. Quando se passa muita fome ou muita sede, se formos com muita sede ou com muita fome, vamos ter problemas físicos, porque ficamos de repente cheios e vai ser uma complicação. Se há um problema físico, também há um problema mental, que é, de repente, a fartura nunca fez bem a ninguém se for toda de uma vez e as coisas não se controlarem. E aqui é um ditado que traduz precisamente isso. E esta é outra que também é física, mas que acontece muito, que é quando temos fome, bocejamos, e quando estamos fartos, arrotamos. É um facto físico, mas também é um facto que acontece nas nossas vidas de uma forma metafórica. E quando estamos com muita fome, podem dizer-nos muita coisa, mas o nosso objetivo é as nossas necessidades básicas. E as nossas necessidades básicas cumprem-se necessariamente começando pelo alimento e pela bebida. Esta era a realidade do campo nos anos 40, 30 e 50 do século passado. Hoje a realidade já não é bem essa. A realidade da paisagem então é muito diferente. Temos desde o olival intensivo a um conjunto de outras realidades que de alguma forma povoam a paisagem de outra maneira, mas não deixa de ser verdade que quem lá anda a trabalhar, não sendo as trabalhadoras e não sendo as pessoas do Alentejo, quem lá anda também anda neste processo de escravatura, normalmente vindos de outros países, ou da Ásia, ou da África. Este é um dos maiores problemas que nós temos e que, acima de tudo, tem o problema de causar um dos maiores flagelos no mundo. Por um lado, a maior parte dos países começa a ter problemas de água e de abastecimento de água potável. Já há muitos países que não têm água potável e que precisam de abastecer ou no mar ou depender de países terceiros para poder sobreviver. Por outro lado, continua a ser uma das maiores causas de morte da infância. muitas crianças ainda continuam a morrer com cólera e outras doenças associadas por causa da água e por causa da água contaminada. E estes provérbios, de alguma forma, ajudam-nos a perceber algumas destas questões. Eles até estão mais desenvolvidos neste livro da nossa amiga Marinela Soares, que fez aqui há 2 ou 3 anos este trabalho e que tem muito mais provérbios, mas que deixa claro aqui como a água é fundamental para a nossa vida. Nós podemos estar vários dias sem comer, mas a água não podemos passar e, portanto, os antigos e as memórias vão de alguma forma lembrando como deveríamos tratar a água, não havendo tanta tecnologia. Eles inclusivamente já falavam da poluição através da questão da cor da água, mesmo sem análises, iam falando dessa questão. E como a questão também da água fervida, que de alguma forma ajudava a resolver o problema das contaminações das nascentes e não só. E trago esta porque um dos principais problemas da água e um dos principais contaminadores da água é a agricultura. Estamos a falar de mais de 70% da água é contaminada pelas questões agrícolas. E à medida que se for industrializando a agricultura, mais há a probabilidade de termos problemas com o acesso à água potável. E esta é uma das realidades que não podemos fugir. Este era um personagem que deixou de existir, mas que não foi assim há tanto tempo. Nós temos água canalizada há pouco mais de 50 anos nas nossas torneiras e estamos a olhar para um aguadeiro, que era a pessoa que com bilhas de barro distribuía a água pelas cidades e pelas vilas, vendendo de porta em porta a água, porque a água era um bem escasso e continua a ser. Depois vem a questão da energia. Nós temos a sorte de viver, eu no Alentejo, mas o Algarve, todo o sul de Espanha, temos a sorte de viver numa zona do mundo que tem mais de 200 dias de sol por ano. E só agora é que se começou a descobrir que afinal o sol podia ser muito importante para as nossas vidas. Como o sol, quando nasce, é para todos, se o aproveitarmos, se calhar conseguimos resolver um dos problemas graves também, que é as questões da energia, que cada vez mais se traduzem num problema que tem a ver com uma realidade que não podemos fugir a ela. Aprendemos a viver com a energia e agora não sabemos viver sem ela. Começámos a pouco e pouco a resolver um problema. Produzir energia é uma coisa tão complexa que, se perguntarmos a um miúdo de onde é que vem a energia, ele chega ao interruptor, liga e diz: vem daqui, está aqui. O problema é que para chegar ali já deu muita volta. E isso é o complexo para as nossas mentes entenderem a dificuldade que é termos energia limpa e para todos. O outro é o vento. Nós estamos num país que tem mar e, portanto, ao pé do mar há vento. E desde sempre me lembro de ouvir falar das eiras e era um processo de energia. Na altura não se associava a isso, mas era necessária a energia do vento para limpar, por exemplo, a azeitona, para limpar outros cereais associados que utilizavam o vento. O vento e o mar, aqui no caso, as velas dos barcos, que também precisam de energia do vento e que desde sempre utilizamos assim. Depois, tem a ver aqui com uma questão também de oportunidade. E este provérbio claramente fala de oportunidade. É um bocadinho um complemento a um outro que nem sequer é um provérbio, é um dito que se diz que há uns que choram e os outros vendem os lenços. E este pode-se encaixar aí no sentido de que se soubermos aproveitar às vezes as oportunidades que temos e aquilo que nos é oferecido, se calhar temos mais sucesso que andar à procura de soluções que não existem. E a água parada não move moinhos, pois claro. Aí acho que até os moinhos que existiam aí por esses rios abaixo, quando secavam, não havia possibilidade de funcionarem. Depois, vêm as alterações climáticas, é agora os dias da discussão do que é que nos vai acontecer, porque está toda a gente a discutir o que é que vão fazer connosco, porque a nós ninguém nos perguntou nada, digo eu. E por isso era importante perceber o que é a parte de cada um neste assunto. E acho que andamos todos nisto, um bocadinho a semear ventos para colher tempestades. Porque achamos sempre que o problema é dos outros, achamos sempre que as questões sobre estas matérias nada têm a ver connosco, é um problema que não nos diz respeito e que os outros que resolvam, que eles é que sabem. Um dia isso pode mudar. Cada um colhe, claro, segundo semeia. E por isso é um complemento daquilo que dizia. E depois temos sempre a tendência de apelar àquela parte mística de que o diabo seja cego, surdo e mudo e outras, para que nos vamos safando e nos vamos de alguma forma resolvendo e vamos lá andando devagarinho. Pode ser que isto escape, pode ser que escape. Depois esta tem a ver um bocadinho aqui com o homem prudente aprende com as desgraças alheias, pois nós por vezes vimos a casa do vizinho a arder, mas achamos que o problema é dele e não aprendemos muito com isso. E neste caso só há um planeta. E como só há um planeta e é o nosso condomínio, se não cuidarmos dele e se não trabalharmos em função de o manter, vamos ter sérios problemas, com certeza. Mais cedo ou mais tarde. Pode ser até só uma herança que deixamos para os outros, mas seguramente que alguém vai pagar. E depois, se calhar, a melhor era isto, era antes de prevenir do que remediar, porque se preveníssemos, se calhar íamos ter muito menos problemas que aqueles que seguramente já estamos a ter. E eu guardei estes dois, este e o próximo, para o fim, porque acho que são fundamentais na mudança que é necessário instituir. Não se fazem sociedades sem educação e não se fazem sociedades sem saúde. Portanto, são os dois últimos que eu deixei, porque as aprendizagens são contínuas, nós estamos sempre a aprender e duvidamos sempre disso. E às vezes os nossos decisores que aprenderam durante muitos anos foram os primeiros a esquecer-se que, afinal, se calhar a educação mudava e alterava comportamentos. Eu costumo dizer isto aos meus alunos, é assim, a coisa mais difícil que fizeram na vida, seguramente, foi começar a andar. A gente, quando começa a andar, tem um problema, que é, vamos ter que nos equilibrar, vamos passar de quadrúpedes para bípedes. Nós nascemos quadrúpedes, andamos em quatro patas, enquanto animais, e depois temos que nos pôr erectos e temos que passar a andar em duas patas. É isto. A nossa vida é isto. E isso é um esforço tremendo. É uma coisa terrível, porque temos que nos pôr em pé, vamos tropeçar muitas vezes, vamos cair muitas vezes, e até que um dia a coisa dá-se, e lá vamos nós e aprendemos a andar. A questão da pedagogia do erro é precisamente isso, é dar a oportunidade que as pessoas caiam para se poderem levantar. Nós somos criados em sociedades que querem condenar o erro, porque temos que ser todos perfeitos e temos que aprender todos à primeira. Ora, sabemos que isso não é assim. É como esta. Quando ganhamos está tudo bem. Se perdermos, temos que pensar porque é que perdemos. Afinal, o que é que nos levou ali? Quais é que são as nossas maleitas ou quais é que foram os nossos erros para chegar ali? E é fundamental olhar nesta perspectiva e ver o problema nessa perspectiva. Porque as vitórias, a gente, no outro dia, recebemos os abraços dos amigos e seguimos em frente. Na derrota, se calhar, temos que pensar porque é que aconteceu. E esta é fundamental. Num mundo em que cada vez mais são as televisões, são as plataformas, são a internet que tomam conta das crianças e são elas que as educam, é fundamental perceber que é na comunidade que a coisa se dá. É na brincadeira. Ainda ontem falava ali com um nosso amigo em que, no tempo em que eu era criança e ele, as brincadeiras de rua, a forma como as mães interagiam quando algum bolhava com o outro e depois iam lá e sanavam aquilo e pronto, já está, isto é de rapazes e segue em frente, é que era o processo educativo. Hoje temos a Netflix, temos a TV não sei quantos e o canal não sei quê e por aí vamos. O estudo é um alimento de moços e a consolação dos velhos. Porque a aprendizagem é a vida toda. Nós passamos a vida toda a aprender coisas. Achamos que às vezes há aquele ditado que diz: burro velho não aprende línguas. Pois não. Quantas aprendizagens foram feitas nestes últimos 2 anos, independentemente da idade? Quantas coisas tiveram que ser aprendidas, independentemente de se ter 5 ou de se ter 90? Quantas coisas. E aquele que aprende ensina. Eu não sei como é que estou de tempo, mas há aqui uma história que eu gostava de contar a propósito deste, aquele que aprende ensina. Há um amigo meu que é alentejano e que é talvez o português que mais tempo teve na Antártida. Esteve na base britânica e esteve lá 83 semanas, sendo que 65 delas foram consecutivas. E na Antártida passar 2 invernos e um verão, em que a temperatura mais amena são menos 12, e as férias são passadas no inverno a menos 47, menos 48, em que dormir numa tenda só a respiração faz estalactites, é interessantíssimo. Mas, tendo em conta isso, ele teve que lá voltar e, portanto, fez as 80 e tal semanas, porque há um processo, e o processo é este. Quando se vai para aquela base, tem-se formação com quem lá esteve. E a seguir, quem lá esteve tem que dar formação aos outros que vão de novo. Há uma passagem de testemunho que se chama aprendizagem. E, portanto, quem aprende ensina. E nós perdemos isto porque isto existia com os mestres e existia com uma série de profissões e fomos ao longo do tempo perdendo esta lógica. Fomos perdendo a lógica de uns ensinarem os outros. Aliás, hoje há algumas coisas não se aprende, é segredo. Não vá alguém depois roubar a ideia. É um bocadinho isso. E por isso, nesse contexto, aquele que aprende a ensinar é quase um dever enquanto cidadão. E por último, esta da saúde, porque a da saúde há uma ideia subjacente, tanto nos provérbios como nas pessoas, e os provérbios refletem aquilo que as pessoas pensam, obviamente, não são inventados, foram criados pelas pessoas. E a ideia é esta: a saúde não tem preço, mas depois repete-se em vários provérbios de uma forma muito efetiva e sempre numa lógica contínua da mesma ideia. Mais vale saúde que dinheiro. Quem goza de saúde perfeita é rico sem saber. A ideia está lá a mesma. A saúde cuidada, vida conservada. E por último, enquanto há saúde, quietos estão os santos. Portanto, não é preciso pedir nada a ninguém, não é preciso fazer procissões, nem fazer caminhadas a santo nenhum, porque estamos bem, está tudo certo. Os santos só vêm, que é quando só lembramos de Santa Bárbara quando faz trovões. E, portanto, nesse contexto, é por aí que a coisa se coloca. E isto é tirado da página das Nações Unidas, mas que completa precisamente o que os provérbios dizem, não sem tirar nem pôr. De uma outra forma, escrito de outra maneira, lá está aquilo que os provérbios dizem, na página das Nações Unidas. E, portanto, ficamos com a clareza de que isto funciona assim. E nós temos ido tentando, de alguma forma, com os provérbios, trabalhar esta questão. Mas eu agora, e porque temos ido insistindo e temos feito esse trabalho ao longo do tempo, e um dos intervenientes está aqui sentado, eu agora pedi-lhe para explicar um bocadinho o que é que a gente andou a fazer na pandemia.
Temos 1 minuto.
É muito rápido.
É, sem dúvida.
É muito rápido.
O que temos andado a fazer na pandemia, talvez se possa resumir muito rapidamente, dizendo que foi uma cooperação entre instituições que cada vez mais nós tentamos fortalecer. Obviamente que o nosso amigo Aires é o presidente a nível nacional da Federação de Associações, Centros e Clubes Unesco, e naturalmente que uma das coisas que nós temos feito em colaboração é tentar motivar os diferentes clubes que há em Portugal, cada um com as suas valências, para que possam tratar destes objetivos que aqui foram referidos e outros que estão implícitos naqueles e que às vezes não são tão fáceis de vislumbrar o alcance. Obviamente que nesse aspecto penso que a pandemia foi relativamente fácil fazer isso, motivando a partir da Federação e connosco, motivando alguns desses clubes para entrarem online, na medida em que durante o último ano foi totalmente impossível ir a cada um desses centros. E assim desenvolvemos, de facto, algumas exposições, fizemos alguns livros que a seu tempo e já outros foram aqui enunciados e, sobretudo, também fizemos uma coisa que é muito importante, porque, como sabem, a Unesco tem normalmente uma lista de dias nacionais, internacionais, mundiais, etc. E, naturalmente, nós aproveitamos isso para justamente transmitir algumas coisas que são importantes. Uma outra coisa que se fez foi efetivamente uma colaboração com a Rádio de Évora, onde todos os meses, todas as semanas, dependia às vezes da nossa disponibilidade e da disponibilidade deles, e realmente nós, de segunda à sexta-feira, tínhamos exatamente uma rubrica, tinham lá na rádio, tínhamos, entre todos nós, uma rubrica chamada Um Provérbio por Dia Não Sabe o Bem que Lhe Fazia. De modo que com isto termino, julgo que já ultrapassei o minuto, mas de qualquer das maneiras acho que foi bom dar esta indicação.
Mas presidente é presidente, temos que demorar. Bom, foi excelente.
Obrigado.
Aires, foi excelente, muito bom, muito bom, muito bom, muito bom. E temos que nos consciencializar que os legumes, os limões não nascem no supermercado, que é o que pensam as crianças, mas tem que haver mais educação, porque quando a fonte seca é que a água tem valor. E passava ao orador seguinte, Justino, onde é que está? 93. Manuel Justino Freitas Rodrigues, que vem da linda Ilha da Madeira e que é um expert em situações culturais ligadas à Madeira e a nível nacional, mas também decorrentes da sua profissão. Portanto, dou a palavra ao Justino, se faz favor.
Aires, pode... Devemos estar atentos ao resgate e ao conhecimento acerca dos provérbios existentes em qualquer sociedade. um dos mais importantes institutos de pesquisa, produção científica e cultural sobre os provérbios, localiza-se na cidade de Tavira, em Portugal. A Associação Internacional de Paremiologia, AIP, promove colóquios interdisciplinares anuais desde 2007 para estimular a pesquisa internacional, reunindo um contingente de investigadores de diversas localidades do globo terrestre. A cidade de Tavira foi batizada como a capital mundial dos provérbios. Estou a citar Alan Martins. Ora, bom dia a todos. É desta forma que inicio o meu trabalho aqui em Tavira. Gostava de agradecer primeiramente à equipa do professor Rui Soares a oportunidade que nós temos de criar os nossos laços internacionais na família de paremiológica. Atraído pelos trabalhos que o Pedro Pereira tem apresentado todos os anos aqui em Tavira e na defesa das línguas maternas, ontem à tarde resolvi convidar o Pedro para comigo partilhar este trabalho, que é sobre alguns provérbios africanos. Este trabalho divide-se em duas partes. A primeira parte é a abordagem de alguns trabalhos do Abreu Pache e do Alan Oliveira, e também do próprio Pedro, e a segunda são provérbios africanos, do Miyakoto e de outras investigações que eu fui fazendo. Por isso, Pedro, convidava-te a partilhares comigo. Ora bem, tenho que ler aqui o texto. O Pablo de Neruda tem aqui uma frase muito interessante, em que ele diz que você começa com maiúsculas e termina com um ponto final. No meio, coloca ideias. No entanto, é preciso fazer investigações para o que nós investigamos terem sentido. Se o provérbio não existisse, seria preciso inventá-lo, mesmo que fosse apenas pelas perguntas, que a sua relação perfeitamente indeterminada com a fala de todos, mas leva a colocar diante da encantadora complexidade das ações da linguagem. Estou a citar Dallet, 1925. Há muitas dificuldades nas investigações e aqui o Flosser, nas investigações que fez no seu livro, haverá futuro para a escrita, tive muitas dificuldades em encontrar alguns elementos científicos que dessem sentido ao seu próprio trabalho, daí eu ter trazido aqui este provérbio. Sankofa é um termo muito interessante, é extremamente interessante, em que o Alan Oliveira define-o da seguinte forma: Sankofa, a busca pela identidade. Segundo Alan Oliveira, o provérbio também é um veículo, como dizem os povos iorubá. O provérbio é o cavalo da palavra. É o transporte no qual um paremiologista inicia a sua investigação. Na África, é necessário fazer leituras transversais, vivências espirituais, uma espécie de sankofa, o provérbio signo que se traduz da seguinte forma: que nunca é tarde para voltar e apanhar o que ficou para trás. Em espécie de crítica, Alan Oliveira acrescenta ainda que ambos, os provérbios e a sabedoria africana, eram rebaixados por uma tradição iluminista que obscureceu gradativamente conhecimentos ancestrais, ditos arcaicos. Até aqui, acreditávamos que um provérbio seria apenas um conselho, uma orientação e mais nada. Os sábios provérbios são muito mais que ditados populares, máximas ou adágios estão presentes na memória, no imaginário literário, em imagens artísticas, na dança e no teatro. Mas para estudar os provérbios africanos é necessário saber o que é a sankofa, um dos ideogramas do conjunto adíncara dos povos Akan, Gana e Costa do Marfim, que significa nunca é tarde para voltar e apanhar o que ficou para trás. Constitui o símbolo da sabedoria de retornar ao passado como maneira de melhorar o presente e construir o futuro. Para perceber e interpretar os provérbios africanos, é necessário perceber os símbolos, imagens, imaginários, literários. Desta forma, a sankofa torna-se um método de comunicação entre o presente, o passado e o futuro. Sankofa é um provérbio cujo símbolo é uma forma circular, mas não o círculo exato. É um círculo criativo pela imagem arredondada e pelo resultado do provérbio, lembrando o espiral. Por exemplo, o tempo presente, dito do outro modo, é o hospedeiro de muitos tempos, até daqueles que podemos não codificar. Sankofa permite a busca. Aqui é um provérbio também da Cristeva, que vem no sentido do provérbio anterior, do penúltimo, em que fala na dificuldade que há muitas vezes em fazer pesquisas, em que os homens, por serem seres racionais, é necessário estudá-los bem para interpretar todas as diferenças linguísticas que existem no mundo. Este é um provérbio angolano que refere que o pequeno caroço, não o desprezes, um dia tornar-se-á uma grande palmeira. Às vezes não devemos pôr de parte as pequeninas coisas, que todas elas são muito importantes na construção de qualquer sociedade. Por outro lado, a Rossana Baú Rabelo faz uma discussão muito importante sobre o Abreu Pacho. Mostra-nos que é preciso compreender que não há composição cultural, social ou política que se apresente estática. Da mesma forma, mostra que o provérbio não é visto apenas como dado da tradição congelada. Por outro lado, a matéria-prima que potencializa a reflexão e recriação, elemento capaz de fazer expandir a força que alimenta e o torna vivo, atuante. O estudo dos testes de panela e das esteiras em Cabinda, região norte de Angola, dos desenhos sobre a areia e da arte rupestre na Lunda, região leste, assim como das danças dos pastores da região sul do país, revelam que o provérbio não é apenas escrito ou falado, mas pode também apresentar como dança, gesto, escultura, grafismo, imagem. Esta noção expandida do provérbio permite mostrar que ele move-se em uma trama bastante rica de linguagens, de elementos e de expressões semióticas. Essa compreensão faz com que Paz construa aproximações entre a força e a potência dos provérbios nas suas mais diversas manifestações e as obras de criação da atualidade, das quais as esculturas de Afonso, as danças do grupo Bismas de Acácias e as músicas de Angala, segundo Paz. Estes últimos artistas assimilaram os procedimentos gráfico-visuais, a coreografia, as danças dos pastores, os ritmos e as sonoridades desses mesmos rituais do Sitita, o do Lungdungo. Há aqui um poema do Abreu Pacho, não sei se tu queres ler.
Podes ler tudo, estás a ler bem, mas se quiseres.
O Abreu Pacho também é poeta.
Então eu vou, que o Justino dá-me essa honra, ler o poema. Vejamos. Exatamente perdida margem. A idade
Antes, contudo, a flora recomenda o mundo. O mapa, outros amores e rancores, a paisagem. Apodrece como espelho disfarce sombras da seiva ocidental. Se apaga aceso o corpo, meu leito, pelos e estações. Cartas tua, erva pela manhã os cheiros. Licor em prefigurações. Deixa rasgado litoral nos salões da história, ferramentas, as cinzas talmente. Por fora escombros, cavernas, antes que poesia tudo deixa atravessada por paz, exatamente perdida margem. A chave no repouso da porta.
Alan Oliveira ainda vem referir que, na opinião de Alan Oliveira, os provérbios, além dos saberes que trazem agregados, circulam por imagens e imaginários na memória e na oralidade. As palavras nos ares africanos têm valores fundamentados nos saberes tradicionais, mas geralmente acabam não sendo utilizadas no aporte dos conhecimentos formais. Isto deve-se ao facto dos provérbios serem bastante fluidos, sobretudo nas culturas orais, com as quais a ciência clássica ainda move certo descrédito. Uma questão interessante sobre os provérbios é a unicidade que se cria. Existem provérbios de todas as sociedades, pois repetem-se ou encontram formas diferentes de dizer a mesma coisa. No contexto africano, existe uma reunificação de diversas sociedades, trazendo como característica estes conhecimentos, dos quais muitos se orgulham, valorizam, acreditam vivências, reproduzem em fins, exaltam a dimensão essencial do provérbio. Por conseguinte, os provérbios são uma fonte de conhecer comunidades e culturas. Agora, uma das partes em que me fez convidar o Pedro é, eu quando cá venho, vejo sempre com uma certa emoção a forma como ele fala nas línguas nativas africanas. E quando estive a compor estes provérbios, e depois, após fazer as pesquisas, não pensei duas vezes em pôr a língua nativa, que ali está com fundo preto. E então vou convidar o Pedro a ler na língua nativa.
A língua que está a ser usada aí é Kikongo, que é uma língua falada no norte de Angola e nas regiões vizinhas, também nas repúblicas do Congo. Então o provérbio diz assim: Guba, Kazangwa, Va, Azu, Kwamuntu, Kaka, Ibosi, Zimena.
O que, traduzido para português e inglês, diz mais ou menos isto: dá os amendoins torrados a uma outra pessoa para que possam germinar. Ora, naturalmente, o amendoim torrado não consegue germinar, mas se nós o dermos a uma pessoa que tenha fome, que vá ao encontro das ODS que o nosso amigo falou antes, que é dar, também contribuir, vamos alimentar uma pessoa que tem fome e vamos contribuir para que ele germine na saúde dessa pessoa. Há pouco, quando falava com o Pedro, ele tem
Pois, este provérbio é interessante, porque leva-nos a um provérbio que eu conheço enfim, da cultura portuguesa, que diz que parece que é Confúcio que dizia, não é? Não dês o peixe, ensina a pescar. E nós, aqui, enfim, não é bem isso. Podes dar o peixe, porque o peixe também vai matar a fome. Portanto, é isso que quer dizer, que eu conheço este provérbio em Quimbundo, mas não fala de amendoins, fala de milho. Milho torrado germina, o sentido é o mesmo, não é? germina. Porquê? Porque produz efeitos no outro, tira-lhe a fome e faz com que ele se sinta grato. É isso que é o germinar, não é? Ele alimenta-se e sente-se, grato para quem lhe deu o milho torrado, e daí que, possivelmente, quando o outro ou que lhe deu o milho precisar de alguma coisa, ali tem a comida que vai dar. Portanto, o milho torrado germinou nessa resposta à gratidão pela oferta que lhe foi feita do milho torrado. Isto é choque, se bem que a forma como apresenta o provérbio não me parece bem choque, mas eu vou ler como choque. Kawakamuta yombo kweku yumbo mesa kafua. Parece mais que imbundo.
Traduzido para português, é o cão que caça javali, pelo javali será morto. É quase parecido com o provérbio que nós temos, que é quem com ferro mata, com ferro morre.
Huma liamu kuluana liakutola vula.
Traduzido pela língua portuguesa, é a testa do mais velho impede a chuva. Logicamente que eu julgo que este provérbio tem grande implantação em África também, por causa da experiência que os mais velhos têm na condução das sociedades.
É isso, portanto, o saber do mais velho ajuda muito.
Exato.
Geji, Keshi, Quimba, Aliose, Kakutawiza.
O visitante não dirige as canções, mas acompanha-as. Ora bem, este provérbio pode ser aplicado muitas vezes quando vamos à casa dos nossos vizinhos ou quando somos convidados a ir à casa de alguém. Temos que nos deixar conduzir e não darmos as nossas ordens dentro da casa que não é a nossa.
É isso mesmo. Waseha ka waseka tangwa lia qualumuka.
Quem sorri multiplica, o dia muda. Naturalmente que as energias positivas fazem com que as pessoas que nos rodeiam fiquem extremamente alegres e tornem o dia muito mais fácil para todos nós. É muito mais fácil estar junto de pessoas com energia positiva, em que estão sempre sorridentes, em que conseguimos conviver uns com os outros, do que ficar num grupo onde às vezes há muito negativismo, muito peso negativo.
Koko vo uvutukanga kutando muntunga sompe quando pangi andi.
Ora bem, se o rio voltasse para a nascente, os homens casar-se-iam com as suas irmãs. É extremamente difícil o rio voltar para trás. E é extremamente também haver este tipo de casamento. Este é um provérbio que se aplica às coisas que são impossíveis de se realizar. É uma espécie de mensagem.
Vomona sodi kaisa kadi sun su kas idi quando ko.
Ora bem, se veres o beco, saúda, pois a galinha não está distante. Ora, isto muitas vezes aplica-se a determinados assuntos que nós temos que realizar atempadamente e logo que o assunto desponta, nós já temos que estar preparados para os analisar e resolver. Não deixes para amanhã, por exemplo, o que podes fazer hoje.
Mona Mukajina Ué.
Pois, isto é filho de rival, rival é também. Isto é mais ou menos um provérbio que eu já li aqui em 2015, que era filho de Balalau, Balalau é. É quase exatamente a mesma coisa. Depois temos aqui provérbios africanos sobre a caça. Alguns destes provérbios eu encontrei-os na terra sonâmbula do Miyakoto, não se consegue ver bem aqui no ecrã, e também num site italiano e no Pensar Contemporâneo. Isto não está em língua materna, mas diz: até que os leões tenham seus próprios historiadores, as histórias de caça continuarão a glorificar o caçador. Isto, no fundo, também é um desafio para que as pessoas se desenvolvam em determinadas características, para que possam escrever também as suas próprias histórias. E este provérbio, o segundo provérbio, se quiseres ler.
Todas as manhãs a gazela acorda sabendo que tem de correr mais veloz que o leão ou será morta. Todas as manhãs o leão acorda sabendo que deve correr mais que a gazela ou morrerá de fome. Não importa se és um leão ou uma gazela, quando o sol desponta, o melhor é começares a correr.
Portanto, esta é a importância de nós dedicarmos no nosso dia-a-dia, nos nossos trabalhos, nas nossas vidas profissionais. Um exército de ovelhas, liderado por um leão, é capaz de derrotar um exército de leões liderados por uma ovelha. Ora bem, isto refere à importância da união, de trabalhar em grupo, de sermos unidos, porque a união faz a força.
Tem cuidado com os leões, mas tem mais cuidado ainda com a cabra que vive no covil dos leões.
Ora, isto é um provérbio que tem uma certa piada, não é? Isto às vezes temos de tomar cuidado sempre com o vizinho do lado, não é? Que não sabemos qual a ponta que ele está a jogar, não é? É interessante. Esqueci-me aqui deu. As teias de aranha.
Quando as teias de aranha se juntam, elas podem amarrar um leão.
Há uma definição também muito interessante sobre estas teias de aranha. Como sabem, as teias de aranha são tão fortes que conseguem suportar o Homem-Aranha. Não é? E então, se conseguem segurar o Homem-Aranha, logicamente que também conseguem segurar um leão. Isto também significa que um conjunto de teias de aranha podem, logicamente, segurar um leão, porque elas referem que a união faz a força.
Exato. Eu acho que essa história, esse provérbio, tem aquela um pau de capim único, parte-se, mas se juntares muitos, já é difícil partir, é isso, não é?
Interessante. O caçador não se cobre de gordura e vai dormir perto do fogo. Isto é um provérbio sobre a cautela, para nós termos cautela com as nossas coisas. Portanto, nós não podemos ir à caça, não podemos depois estar a nos cobrir com a gordura, que depois, se calhar morremos ainda queimados.
O caçador que persegue um elefante não para atirar pedras aos pássaros.
Ora, há um grande objetivo que é perseguir o elefante e apanhar o elefante. Logicamente que ele não pode perder tempo com pequenas coisas. Há um objetivo grande que nós traçamos para a nossa vida e devemos seguir esse objetivo e não perder tempo com coisas pequenas, com coisas inúteis que não fazem sentido.
Um tigre não deve proclamar seu orgulho.
Ora, aqui onde diz orgulho deveria ser ferocidade. Ora, um tigre que é forte não precisa de dizer que é forte. Toda a gente sabe que ele é forte. Isso aplica-se também na nossa sociedade, enquanto nós estamos seguros daquilo que estamos a fazer. Logicamente, não precisamos de demonstrar ou repetir 3 ou 4 vezes sempre a mesma coisa. Chamaram-me a atenção. O tempo está a acabar.
O homem não vai longe de onde cozinha o milho.
Este provérbio significa que nós devemos nos preocupar exatamente com as nossas coisas. É um provérbio sobre a cautela.
Se não tapar os buracos, terá de reconstruir as paredes.
Este é um provérbio ali que tem a ver com cuidar daquilo que nós já temos. Cuidar daquilo tudo que nós temos e possuímos, de forma que as coisas não se desagreguem, que as famílias não se desagreguem.
O mal entra furtivamente como uma agulha, mas depois revela-se como um carvalho.
Muitas vezes há elementos negativos, entram e deixamos crescer, tornam-se depois uma espécie de uns vírus que acabam por nos destruir.
Conselhos milenares e provérbios de esperança. Não se pode esconder a fumaça se acender o fogo.
Isto é um provérbio do Burundi. As ações têm consequências visíveis.
A paixão e o ódio são filhos da bebida que se embriaga.
Bom, vou passar à frente, o tempo está a acabar.
Já acabou.
Lembrem-se, depois da tempestade há sempre um arco-íris, que depois da tempestade vem a bonança. E finalmente, para terminar, o rio enche-se graças aos pequenos riachos, que são os pequenos conhecimentos que nós vamos adquirindo. As grandes vitórias dependem também dos pequenos sucessos. Muito obrigado. Muito obrigado pela atenção. Peço desculpa por ter passado o tempo.
Bom. É insignificante, mas pronto, questões não há tempo. Se houver, como sempre, como se tem feito e como já é sabido, poderão ser dirigidas por e-mail. Eu agora chamo Tomás Ferreira, o nosso último orador desta manhã, com um tema interessante, provérbios na tradição em O Senhor dos Anéis.
Hello everybody. To the relief of all our foreign friends, I'll speak in English. I'll divide. Everybody can hear me okay? I don't know if this is functioning. Well, I hope so. I'll divide my presentation in 2 parts. In the first part, I want to talk to you about, because presumably many of you have no great experience of reading Tolkien, and reading Tolkien is reading a whole shelf of very long books, some of them, as well as some dispersed small pieces. So it does constitute some work, as well as at least 12 books collecting and analyzing and putting into place every small bit of sketch and draft of things that later became great things. So as you say, as we saw in the presentation of the former speaker, great things begin small, and then But so I'll start by saying this. You know, the other day I read in a review in a newspaper, and the reviewer said about Tolkien, how is it that a single man becomes the equivalent of a whole people and a whole history? And the point is really that. How does one single man create a whole fictional world that could just about be real? And the point for our purposes here is that world has a history, it has a mythology, it has a botany, it has a carefully constructed, it has a carefully constructed, how to put this? It has a carefully constructed anthropology. So by no means are all the creatures there men, but they all have their lore. They all have their customs. Those customs are perfectly developed. They were developed over many years. I don't know if you have. Don't know if you have the notion of this, but The Lord of the Rings took 19 years to write, and took 5 years to publish. So a whole lot of work went into these novels, but the curious thing is, nothing remotely like this had ever been done before. No man had. Well, we speak about Homer, but we have to think. Well, Homer or Dante or whatever. But the curious thing is, Homer wrote about a real war. He didn't invent the War of Troy. Well, sort of. I know. Sort of. He wrote about what had been on the conscious memory of his people for a long time. And here, things get more complicated because we don't even really know if Homer is a single person or many people or perhaps, But for example, we talk about other giants of Western literature, and I don't know, Dante or Chaucer. The curious thing with medieval writing is that they copied a lot, they transformed a lot, and that's actually the closest thing we have to Tolkien, but that's because they were interacting with all the minds that had worked previously. The fact is that Tolkien started from the scratch, and then managed to build a whole set of civilizations and a whole set of cultural memories that exist on the page, but could have existed. Well, they couldn't, but you know what I mean. As a cultural mnemonic construction, they could have been someone's memories. And the role of Proverbs in The Lord of the Rings has a lot to do with that, because the books are made of, I don't know if you know the structure of The Lord of the Rings, but The Lord of the Rings is a story about a journey, fundamentally, an adventure. And the adventure includes numberless bits of poetry that were supposed to have been transmitted by ancient lore. So that inside the fictional world, those bits of poetry, those bits of verse, proverbs, sayings, counsels, injunctions, they were supposed to be old. They were supposed to have come down from before, from people who lived before. And it's this, Tolkien worried a lot when after completing The Lord of the Rings, he was trying to find a way to present the Silmarillion in a finished form, and the Silmarillion is basically where it all started. And he worried about one thing, that if the beginning of a world would be told, the sense of depth and age would be lost. So, when we get to The Lord of the Rings, you get to a world that is already old. It has history, it has past, it has memory. If you tell the beginning of that memory, you have nothing before that. So it would be very Titanic. And actually, the Silmarillion is very. I suppose a good analogy is that if you think about Western history, Western civilization, all stories, in a sense, you could argue this, you could dispute this, but also all stories somehow can be tracked down to the Bible. The point with the Silmarillion is it's like publishing the Bible for the first time. It would not allow for a past before that. Anyway, so the point with Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is that it is quite a curious book in that it is supposed to transmit a sense of a civilization nearing its end, a world nearing its end, and that's where Proverbs come into play. These Proverbs, and I want to argue in this communication, that's the second part of my presentation, I want to argue in this communication that basically the whole story of the Lord of the Rings hinges on a single proverb. That proverb is the proverb I first saw 4 days ago when I arrived in Tavira. It was affixed in a lamppost by Rui. And that proverb is, in Portuguese, nem tudo que é ouro, nem tudo que luz é ouro. So not all that glitters is gold. And Tolkien, but I'll go there. I'll get to that later. But Tolkien transforms this proverb. He mutates it. But before we get there, I want to give you an example of what I was saying, and we can look, for example, at page 97 of the Fellowship of the Ring. You have a thing that's very curious. Someone who didn't create these verses is speaking them because he heard them before. So they were supposed to be old verses, composed in the youth of a character that is no longer in the book. That character is Bilbo Baggins. And Bilbo Baggins supposedly did not create these verses either. He had worked on them from other sources, and he had changed them. The verses are, and they appear in several forms in the Lord of the Rings, and that's another thing Tolkien does. I think all of you who know Tolkien probably know that he was a professor of medieval literature, and not only was he a professor of medieval literature and was well acquainted with this subject, he was also, I think, fascinated by origins and by the origin of myths and the origins of works of art that we've come to cherish, such as Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Beowulf. Beowulf was a great concern of his. And I think this shows that Tolkien was conscious that when you make a verse or when you make a proverb, it grows. You cease to control it. It spreads, and people change it, and people recite it, and people make mistakes reciting it, and it acquires new forms. And this stanza is a stanza that appears in many different forms with many different alterations all through the Lord of the Rings. It appears like 4 times or 5 times. The stanza is, the road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with weary feet, until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet, and with a then I cannot say. And this is as they set out from the Shire, and they have no idea at all where they're going. Well, they have a faint idea, but they don't know all the perils that they'll encounter. And it's curious that Tolkien is putting this in there, in the Hobbit's mouth, because it's like the book prefiguring itself, pointing to itself, and pointing to what will be its own development. And I wanted to read this because you can, if you read the book, or if you have read the book, you'll see that many alterations are done to this poem. And you have even several music settings of this song with the several different versions of it. For example, the Tolkien ensemble sings one version, and whoever else sings another version. For example, there is a very curious alteration in that in the 7th verse, the 7th verse is pursuing it with weary feet. At another point in the book, I think Bilbo says, rather inappropriately, because he is old, pursuing it with eager feet. So you see, different poets working upon the same source material change it. And that's how literature, especially those treasures of literature that lie at the heart of our national literatures, come about. They come about by poets working on the same raw material and changing them. At least this is one possible explanation. It's the explanation I'm adopting here for practicality's sake. I'm not an expert in oral literature. I hope to be one day, but but now I want to talk about another thing. I want to go to page 322. Don't worry, because the second part of my presentation is much easier to follow. I want to go to page 222, and they are at the Council of Elrond, and they're deciding what the hell to do with that bloody ring. Boromir, who turns out to be quite a conflicted character in the book, Boromir says he had a dream, and in the dream everything became dark in the eastern sky, and he heard a voice, and we don't know whose voice it is. And actually here it comes, here another thing comes, because it has been said by several critics that not a single time is the name of God mentioned in The Lord of the Rings, and however, his face shines through every page. And that's quite right. I mean, who is the voice that you hear when you look to a darkened eastern sky? And there's only one answer for that. And Tolkien knew it perfectly well, and he knew his readers would know it as well. And Boromir hears this. He hears a verse. So God also speaks in traditional forms. And this is a bit like, sorry to another parenthesis. I don't know if any of you here, I know Mikael does, but I don't know if many of you here know, but the Icelandic sagas, are prose. They have been born out of oral tradition, just like The Lord of the Rings, and Tolkien was very much well acquainted with the sagas. There's a curious feature of The Lord of the Rings, and actually perhaps this is the best analogy. There's a curious feature of The Lord of the Rings that is similar to the sagas, in that the sagas have what the scholars of Old Norse call lausafisur, verses, stanzas that are lost from their context, but they are about the character in the saga, so the later prose writer inserts the verses in the saga. Or, for example, even as said by a character in the saga. For example, Egil Skallagrimsson, who in the saga that bears his name is actually a rather good poet, and quite a wicked character and a conflicted character. Egil Skallagrimsson speaks several verses that, I suppose many of you can enlighten me about this, but he speaks several verses that are put in his mouth, but those verses are lausafisur. They are stanzas coming from much older oral tradition, passed down through centuries. Mind you, the sagas, especially the sagas of Icelanders, which is one type of family sagas, one type of sagas, the sagas of Icelanders were written from the 13th century onwards. And these verses, but they are about characters who lived at the age of settlement. And Iceland was settled in the 9th century, so 4 centuries before. So you get an idea of how old this memory is. And the same thing happens in The Lord of the Ring, except it is made up. So I will read the stanza that Boromir says. Boromir says that the sky told him, "Seek for the sword that was broken, in Imladris it dwells. There shall be counsels taken, stronger than Mogul spells. There shall be shown a token that doom is near at hand. For Isildur's bane shall waken, and the halfling forth shall stand." And we who are reading the book know perfectly well that this at the moment of utterance, at the moment it was supposedly uttered to Boromir, it was a prophecy. Now it is no longer, because we are seeing it happening before our eyes. This just to illustrate how bits of oral lore, bits of verse, sayings, maxims, play their part in The Lord of the Rings. I could also quote an instance, for example, when they're leaving the Shire, where Merry says something like, "No good comes from taking," well, I'm paraphrasing, but he says something like, "No good comes from taking shortcuts." And the form in which he says it is supposed to be a proverb inside The Lord of the Rings. But now I just want to pay homage to a conference of this morning that I did not listen to because I was worrying about the final touches of what I'm saying to you now. And the conference was, I think, by Oti Lau Hakangas, who spoke about Kalevala. And I just want to say this very briefly, that Tolkien loved Kalevala, and he tried very hard to teach himself Finnish, to read it in the original. Unfortunately, he was not wholly successful. He was somewhat successful, but he fell so much in love with Finnish language, and I know Rui is a lover of Finnish as well. He fell so much in love with Finnish language that he borrowed what he called phonetic symbolism from Finnish. So he based one of his invented languages, and as probably many of you know, if you know anything about Tolkien, that he created several invented languages. The most developed of the two were Quenya and Sindarin, and he borrowed the phonetic aesthetics of Finnish from Finnish into Quenya. And I'll read now a verse that appears in page 494 of the Fellowship of the Ring, so quite near the end. 496, sorry. And you know, there is another curious thing about how Tolkien uses supposedly old poems in The Lord of the Rings. Sometimes he quotes poems in his invented languages and doesn't even bother to translate them. So sometimes we don't really know very much. There is a verse, for example, Il bereth Giltoniel, Silivren Penamiriel, etc., etc. And we don't know what that means until very much later in the book when it is repeated and a translation is added. Because for like 300 pages, we don't really know what they were on about. We know that it was about Varda, a demigod, an angelic figure, but we don't know really what they were saying. And now I'm going to read precisely something that I find very beautiful, because this time we have the translation. And it's a verse. It's a verse about the passing away of Middle-earth and the changing of civilizations and the passing of time and the unavoidable power of exile in Middle-earth. The verse is, Ai laurie lantar la sissurinen, je un'ottime verrà maraldaron, je ne vellinte iul daravanier, mi oromardi lisse mirovoreva. Andune pella vardu telumar, nulluinia sentilintari eleni, o mariu airetari lirinen. Simaniul maninen quantova, ansi tintale varde oiolessio, vefaniar maria telentari ortane, ar ilie tierundo lave lumbole, ar sindanoriello caetamornie, I falmalinar imbemet, ar issie untupa calacirio mirioele, si vanuana, Romelo vanua valimar. Namarie, nai Jeruvalie valimar, nai Elie Jeruva, namarie. And now I translate, rather Tolkien translates. Like gold fall the leaves in the wind, long years numberless as the wings of trees. The years have passed like swift draughts of the sweet mead in lofty halls beyond the west, beneath the blue vaults of Varda, wherein the stars tremble in the song of her voice, holy and queenly. Who now shall refill the cup for me? For now the kindler Varda, the queen of stars, from Mount Everwhite has uplifted her hands like clouds, and all paths are drowned deep in shadow, and out of the grey country darkness lies on the foaming waves between us, and mist covers the jewels of Calakiria forever. Now lost to those from the east is Valimar. Farewell, Namaria. Maybe thou shalt find Valimar. Maybe even thou shalt find it. Farewell. And besides this poem being beautiful in its Quenya original, which, as Rui will confirm, does sound quite a lot like Finnish, or at least it does. It gives the impression of sounding quite a lot like Finnish. This is one of those instances in The Lord of the Rings when we get a bit of the feeling of what it was like to be a medieval man. Because for the Middle Ages, you must remember that in the Middle Ages, and I argued once with a teacher at my university, she was saying that there is nothing that is remotely realistic in The Lord of the Rings. in terms of medieval recreation. And I said, no, Tolkien didn't need to recreate some historical reenactment, because he was at heart a medieval man, and he knew quite well how medieval people felt. That's because he studied the texts, and you gain a lot from studying the texts. And Tolkien, you know, this is a bit. This poem gives us a bit of the inklings, a bit of an inkling of how it was for a medieval man to look back over the expansive 10 centuries and think that the most important event of world history, the crucifixion of Christ, it happened so long ago, and that we were all living in the shadow of that event. Just like that, the elves were also living in the shadow of the exile from Valinor, and they sang about it, and they talked about it, and that's how supposedly these bits of verse that got encrusted in the Lord of the Rings were born. Of course, they were not. They were. This is all an artful game, but it's quite a meaningful artful game, because again, these verses from supposedly older written tradition, and mind you, some of them really are older in written tradition, because they had been written by Tolkien years before, and they were just recycled into the Lord of the Rings. But these verses do give you, like the allusions in Beowulf, a sense of depth, a sense of time, a sense of old age. When you get to the Lord of the Rings, you have a universe that knows itself to be old, and the characters know they are living at the end of times, an end of times before a new spring, in a sense. Well, now I want to get to my final contention here, and this was just a rambling digression to get to this. We'll get to page 224, and this is where I'll end. 224, and in page 224, Butterbur, who is the innkeeper at Bree, remembers upon seeing Frodo that he had a letter from Gandalf that he forgot to post to him, which caused considerable disruption. And the letter from Gandalf it encourages Frodo. It says to Frodo that, well, bad news reached me. I need to go off at once and all that, and you should leave the Shire as soon as possible, because, well, things will go bad if you don't. But he encloses a verse, and the verse is probably of his own making, which is actually rather well, if it's not of his own making, it is at least employed craftily by him. And the verse is, and it starts right with the proverb that's most important in the Lord of the Rings. This is probably the single most important sentence in the Lord of the Rings. And the verse is, all that is gold does not glitter. So you see here the proverb. The proverb was, the original proverb, and it was an English proverb, was not all that is gold glitters, and not all that glitters is gold. And there are two versions. And Tolkien craftily, to his purposes, changes it to read, all that is gold does not glitter. And this actually hides the philosophy of the Lord of the Rings. The philosophy of the Lord of the Rings is that things seem one way, and they generally are quite the opposite. So you look at, and Gandalf is a philosopher of small things. He is a great wizard. He's come from Valinor, and yet he likes to spend his time with hobbits, smoking pipe and eating and telling jokes and making fireworks. And he knows quite well, and Tolkien wants us to know through him, that small things quite often accomplish great things. And the Lord of the Rings is quite exactly the story of one small creature changing the course of mythological history. And this poem synthesizes that. The poem is, all that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither, deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken, a light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken, the crownless again shall be king. Now, this is a prophecy of the whole action of the next three books. It basically says two things. For example, this is just my interpretation. I have no idea if this was said before, and neither did I try very much to look for it. But not all those who wander are lost can apply to two, well, the first verse I think is clear, applied to everybody, but not all those who wander are lost applies at least to Gandalf himself, because he is known as Mithrandir, the elf who goes about with, Gandalf actually, the elf who goes about with a staff. So a staff is the symbol of pilgrims, even in our world, and it was so in Tolkien's mythological world. And he says that, oh well, you know, I can seem that I go about a lot aimlessly roaming through Middle-earth, but I actually have a purpose. So not all those who wander are lost. And this is quite a proverb in itself. The old that is strong does not wither. Again, Gandalf. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. So if you, and this is a curious verse, because if you're rooted, and this is quite a moral counsel, because if you're rooted properly in the things you should be rooted on, say God, family, goodness, loyalty, whatever, and all these things were very important for Tolkien. If you're rooted properly in this life, you're not likely to be felled by a strong wind, as if you were an uprooted oak or something like that. And this is very curious. From the ashes a fire shall be woken. Now, at this point in the Lord of the Rings, as I said, we are in an old world, a world that has known many wars, conflicts, losses, crying and grinding of teeth. But Gandalf says here something that's very important, that from this seemingly broken world, from this seemingly disordered, rent asunder collection of diminished forces for good, good shall be rekindled. And a fire capable of defeating evil and lighting the way in the dark will be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. So even in the greatest dark, you can produce some light. And this reminds me this has just occurred to me now, this reminds me of another thing that Gandalf says in The Lord of the Rings. And if you haven't realized it yet, Gandalf is probably the character that originated Dumbledore in Harry Potter, even though J.K. Rowling does say that she never finished The Lord of the Rings. I quite doubt that. But then again, celebrities nowadays, you know. So Gandalf says in another part of The Lord of the Rings that you know, Frodo complains that Bilbo had not killed Gollum. That Bilbo had not killed Gollum when he had the chance. That awful creature. And Gandalf says to him, you know, and I quote almost from memory, but Gandalf says, "Many who live deserve death, and many who die deserve life. Can you give it to them? So don't be so hasty in dealing out death as punishment." And he says, you know, I feel that even that wretched creature has some purpose to play. And in fact, we later see that it is Gollum who ultimately destroys the ring because Frodo was turning back. So I think the light that is kindled, sprung from the shadows, is actually Gollum, an evil creature who in the end unwittingly does good. Renewed shall be blade that was broken. Well, this is the clearest one. So it refers to, the sword Narsil, who is the symbol of the renewal of kingship and the renewal of the reign of man. And I get to the end, the crownless again shall be king, and all those who read it know who it means. It is Aragorn, who in the end of the book becomes king of Gondor, and the one who presides over a renewal of Middle-earth. So in this verse, the whole trilogy is synthesized, and it is put in the mouth of Gandalf, the roaming fool, the lost wayfarer. And it's quite common and quite interesting that so often, it is the eccentrics and the fools who light the way. Thank you.
Ok. Muito interessante, mesmo não entendendo muito o inglês, mas sim. Peço que, entretanto, se juntem, porque vai haver a distribuição de diplomas aqui à frente e anunciar uma atividade para esta tarde que me foi solicitado, que é a sessão de abertura da exposição, vai decorrer na Biblioteca Municipal às 2h30 da tarde. 2h30 da tarde. E vamos então juntar-nos aqui à frente para a entrega dos diplomas, se fazem favor. As questões, mais uma vez eu digo, serão para as solicitar por e-mail.
Those that are online following our session, I will keep beginning with Lisa Gramboy-Ranen, and after Marius is here, Paola Attolino have been here, but just not now. Okay, okay, so you can give her. Iris, Justino, and finally Tomás. So, okay, as Philippe told, this afternoon we will move to the municipal library to see one exhibition, two exhibitions, and also to have the announcement of one book and maybe some surprise inside the municipal library. And just here at 7. No, Marinelli is not so good in mimics, and I don't.
Please don't forget the dinner today is free in Hotel Villa Galé about 7:30. Okay? Yeah. Together. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Have a good lunch. Thank you, and profit the sunny day. Em português é mais simples, porque todos estão aqui agora, entendem? Nós vamos...